G'day and welcome to another episode of Kiwi Car Life. And a few weeks ago you would have seen that I bought this very cheap 2003 Audi S4, and today we're going to be turning this into the ultimate sports sedan. But first we need to go back to the 1980s to discover how this car even came to be. Back then sedans were family cars and certainly weren't meant to be all that sporty. So you can imagine the shock on Mr. Benz and Mr. BMW's face when Audi launched the Sport Quattro with a 147 kilowatt turbocharged 5-banger. Not wanting to be outdone in this new segment of the market, Audi rivals quickly struck back with the equally as powerful E30 M3 and Mercedes 190e Cosworth. In the early 1990s, BMW and Mercedes upped the stakes by installing massive 3-litre and 3.6-litre straight sixes under the bonnet of their M3 and C36 AMG. And Audi's 2.7-litre twin-turbo V6 found in the B5 S4, the predecessor to this car, fell behind. So with the next generation, the B6 Audi decided to go big or go home. BMW launched the incredible 252 kilowatt E46 M3, Mercedes the 260 kilowatt supercharged C32 AMG, and Audi trumped them all by installing a 4.2-litre V8 under the bonnet of the B6 S4. The upgrades weren't just limited to the engine either. It got a discreet aero package, solid aluminium door mirrors, uprated suspension, larger brakes, Recaro seats, and subtle S4 badges on the exterior, side skirts, and gauges. But that engine is really what makes this car special. 253 kilowatt and 410 newton meters nearly a quarter of a century ago, and a dirty V8 racket that sounds absolutely heavenly. And I'm convinced that because of this V8, a few years after the B6 S4 went out of production, Germany and Japan served up the 4 greatest V8 sports sedans ever to exist: the B7 RS4, E90 M3, C63 AMG, and Lexus ISF. And so in turn, the B6 S4 is a groundbreaking car. It set the tone for sports sedans to come. But even more remarkably, today they represent incredible value for money. This is literally a V8 manual transmission sports sedan that was designed to go head to head with the 30 to 50 grand E46 M3, and yet these can be picked up for like 6, a price so good that even I couldn't refuse, hence this car here. So how did I get this S4 and what needs to be fixed on it? Well, a couple of weeks ago, a friend from Auckland sent it to me on TradeMe with the listing stating that it needed a new headlight for a while in fitness. My friends very kindly went and looked at it for me and deduced that the most likely cause of the dead headlight was actually just a dead ballast, a fairly simple fix, and the rest of the car was fantastic. A lot of the suspension had been replaced, as with most of the cooling system. It had a short shifter, the engine was completely smooth even on cold start, and the service book was full of dealer history up until just 50,000 Ks ago. So having decided that it was indeed worth the buy, they picked it up on my behalf, drove to the nearest pick-a-part where they got a used xenon ballast which fixed the headlight, took it for a while to fitness, and amazingly it passed. Around the same time as all of this was going on, I sold my red Audi S5 that I restored on the channel recently to someone in Auckland. So my Auckland friends and I organised to meet halfway in National Park, spend a couple of days up the mountain, and then swap cars and drive the rest of the way home. After a lot of fun skiing and sliding around in the snow, we all went our separate ways in our new cars. And it was on this trip that we discovered the first thing wrong with my S4. It was just really slow. It should have easily been able to overtake my friend's W8 Passat, given this has got 60 more horsepower at its disposal, and yet for some reason it couldn't. After doing a bit of research, I learned that these have a fancy looking intake plenum there on the top of the engine for a reason, because there is a flap in the intake which is shut below 5,000 RPM to force the air to run through a really long runner to help make lots of torque at lower RPM. But then over 5 grand, the flap opens, allowing air to rush through a nice short path into the engine to make lots of power at the top end. But the flap was stuck in the low RPM mode,
which of course was killing the top end power because the air couldn't flow fast enough into the engine. I figured this out by manually pushing the flap into the high RPM setting, and sure enough, now it's got all the top end power back but lacks the mid-range torque. It's actually quite remarkable how much of a difference the length of the intake runners makes. So the first job, of course, is to free up that flap properly so that we can have torque down low and power up top. The traction control button is peeling. It needs an almighty clean inside and a mega polish on the outside, and the drug dealer knockoff Audi wheels have got to go. And so, hopefully by the end of today's video, we should have ourselves a fully restored S4 Sport Saloon that also happens to be basically the cheapest manual V8 in the country. So let's set to work.
The first thing I decided to fix was the worn out traction control button. I took my TT down to pick apart and found a B6 A4 with an ESC button in far better condition, so I brought it home, pried the old button out and installed the new one. With that small job done, it was time for the big one, the stuck intake manifold flap. With absolutely no idea what I was doing and no YouTube videos online to follow, I had no choice but to just wing it. I began by uninstalling all of the plastic covers in the engine bay, followed by the intake pipe, and then yanked away at the fuel rail trying to get the injectors out. I got the first 4 out without breaking anything, but the wiring loom for the passenger side injectors had so little slack. When the injectors finally popped out, it completely cleaned out one of the plugs in the process. I then continued breaking things in the engine bay when I removed a couple of vacuum hoses that naturally all just snapped like twigs. So, having got off to a dreadful start, I continued working away the next day, undoing dozens of bolts holding the turtle shell-shaped intake manifold to the block, and I also removed the throttle body with 4 easy bolts around the perimeter. The tricky part though was getting the manifold out of the car, as there were no less than 7 plugs on the front for the manifold flap vacuum system and grounding points on the valley pan. These stopped you pulling the manifold out front first, and the oil filter housing behind stopped you pulling the manifold out back first. In the end, I just did things the wrong way and split the manifold in half so that I could access those plugs in the front a lot easier. With the flap exposed, it became very clear just how stuck it was, as moving it even with my hands was almost impossible. But finally, with the manifold removed and the flap dismantled, I could start the cleaning and rebuilding process. I brake cleaned the crap out of the throttle body, manifold inlet, gaskets and intake flap. Even after cleaning though, the flap still wasn't moving freely, so I just cheated and sanded down the plastic so that it was slightly smaller in diameter, which worked perfectly. I carried on cleaning and water blasting the 2 halves of the intake, which gave an interesting opportunity to see how air moves through this very intricate intake design. With them drying off, I also cleaned out the engine bay as there was sludge from oil leaks building up all over the place. I had to go to pick apart again to get an injector plug, and with that sourced, I stripped the 2 wires and connected it up. Fortunately, as the plug is universal across all Audis from this era, aside from the join hidden inside the wiring loom, you'd have no idea that plug wasn't original. Now finally, everything was ready to go back together. I installed the now free moving flap and the little spring on the end that pushes it back down, along with the arm that connects it to the vacuum actuator. The 2 halves of the intake manifold went back together easily, along with the inlet and throttle body. Then I brought it back to the car and plugged in all the hardware at the front of the manifold before bolting it firmly to the block. I reinstalled the fuel rail, which after lubing the seals went on a hang of a lot easier than it came out. The intake pipe went back on too, although I wasn't done breaking things yet as I snapped the hose clamp, but after routing up my new vacuum lines that I snapped while pulling it apart, I reinstalled the plastic covers, and finally, after 2 days of work, the S4 was ready for its first start. So, with the intake flap and traction control button fixed, it was time to start on the cosmetics. While the previous owner had definitely kept it relatively clean, all that hard washing over the years had really dulled the black paint. So, after washing off the whole car, I thoroughly clay-barred all of the paintwork to get rid of any contaminants in the paint and started polishing. As I've said in the past, while I'm not much of a black car fan, some of the most rewarding cars I've polished have been my Black Legacy 3Litre R, BMW 330i and Accord Euro. For almost any other colour aside from dark blue, a polish is almost pointless because while it definitely protects the paint, the swirls and scratches are barely visible anyway. But with this S4, the transformation was remarkable. The faded bonnet came up amazing. All of the nasty swirls all over the doors and bumpers mostly disappeared, and after a whole afternoon with orbital polisher in hand, the car was starting to look really great. I used some metal polish on the door mirrors and exhaust tips and finished off by installing my Kiwi Car Life European style number plates. With the exterior basically done, I moved inside and vacuumed all of the carpets and floor mats, wiped down the plastics, brushed in between all of the panel gaps and conditioned the leather seats and steering wheel. But I didn't stop there, as I managed to source some stock S4 18-inch wheels on a recent trip to Auckland, which brought the exterior back to completely factory condition. And with that, the S4 was complete. Ladies and gentlemen, the Audi S4 is complete, and what a lovely vehicle it is. 4.2 litre manual transmission. Let's see how it goes. Oh, that is just lovely. Now, I must confess, compared with the E46 M3 that this car directly competes with and that I used to own a year ago, it is a little bit softer. You can tell that this car is made to be the everyday sports sedan, whereas the E46 is a lot more raw. And the main difference really is the engine and the drivetrain. The transmission in this I actually reckon feels better than the E46, and the steering feel is just as good. It's actually a surprisingly fast steering rack, but the engine, while it is fantastic to have a V8, it only revs to 7,000 RPM. The E46 goes to 8, and when you put your foot down, it smoothly gives you a surge of power, whereas the E46 just roars to life with that crazy 3.2 litre straight 6. The gear ratios are a touch longer on this car too, which means you are sort of waiting a wee bit to try and get the revs right up to redline. And of course, because it is four-wheel drive, it means that you have excellent grip on corner exit, but you ain't going to be hanging the back end out on your B6 S4 anytime soon. Foot to the floor, you just get traction control interference and understeer. So it's not as sharp as an E46 M3, but down a road like this, you know, you can't use much more than about 250 odd kilowatt. And this is just perfect, where you can go foot to the floor, you can exploit the V8, but you're not going to outrageously quickly. It really is a brilliant do-everything sports sedan. Exactly what I look for in a car. It's got the features, except cruise control. It's got the power. It's got that lovely V8 racket from the front end. I've actually been pleasantly surprised by the Audis that I've owned in recent times. I was a Honda guy for years, and arguably still am. I've just owned all the ones I want to own, and then I went through all the BMWs, and now that I've kind of owned all of the BMWs I want to own, I'm trying a few Audis. And you know, originally I sort of saw these as just kind of a worse BMW. Similar concept, but four-wheel drive, which I don't really need or use, so it just makes them more cumbersome driving experience. And while it is true to a point, a BMW is a sharper drive than an Audi, these are still brilliant cars, and for something a bit different, you know, to try something new, something a bit more unique, this is just a great car. I hope you've enjoyed the restoration process with this lovely manual V8 Audi, and with that, I will look forward to seeing you again next time.